Wrigley Field, a beautiful sunshiny day. This is that moment we've been dreaming about all winter, especially when that snow was flying in January around here.
Snowing out here, yeah, I'd say so. It's really starting to whip out there. Maybe they're cheering for the snow. I think they are. Not to get theatrical, but I mean, how better can you write a script here for crying out loud?
Chicago is a place for all seasons, with teams that symbolize the promise of spring and the chilling challenge of winter. The city's athletic tradition has been molded by a two-fisted spirit. Frigid fields and rain-slicked roadways are part of a diverse sporting landscape forged by heart and muscle. High times, hard knocks, and the heat of battle have produced the great men and great moments that make Chicago's sports history unique.
I've always said that Chicago was the greatest city in the world and likely the greatest group of fans that any athlete would want to play for.
My kind of town, Chicago is. The Wrigley Building, Chicago is. My kind of town that won't let you down. It's my kind of town.
That's a fly ball, beat the left, back. That's it. That's it. Ernie Banks got number 500.
The Golden Jet driving it center in on the Ranger defense. Getting set. He may pass or shoot. He drives one. Score! Behold, has broken the all-time scoring record of 51 goals in a single season.
Walter Payton becomes the National Football League all-time leading rusher, surpassing Jim Brown, and that's the equivalent to Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's all-time home run record.
Carl Sandburg celebrated Chicago as the husky, brawling city of big shoulders. This image could also apply to some of Chicago's greatest sports heroes, men who possess the towering presence of a skyscraper. Men like Dick Butkus, number 51, the toughest tackler to ever tear into a ball carrier. This Hall of Fame linebacker earned All-Pro honors 8 times during his 9-year career.
Butkus is synonymous with football. It's synonymous with hitting, contact, aggressiveness. He's the best who ever played the position.
While Dick Butkus was a hard-hitting heavyweight on the gridiron, a Chicago-born welterweight named Barney Ross fought his way to fame in the boxing ring.
He was not what you call a devastating puncher who could take you out with one punch. He could hit you in a proper position. He could blueprint you. He could tell you, I'm going to hit him right on the chin with a right hand. He had a left jab that was like a machine gun. And he'd get out there and that left hand start going and moving. And when he hit you with a right hand, he didn't just throw a right hand for the sake of throwing a right hand, he hit you right on the chin.
Ross was a scrappy hero during scuffling times.
He was very well loved. Came along right during the Depression when you had nothing to look forward to. When all you saw were pictures of men selling apples and people out of work waiting in lines. Barney Ross played a very, very important role in taking us out of the doldrums and having something to look forward to.
In 1963, the city rallied around a team of battlers, Loyola University's basketball squad.
Everybody was sitting back saying, Loyola, that's that university by the railroad tracks down there on the North Shore. I think that's the one in Chicago. I don't think it's the one in New Orleans. And they weren't sure, and they kept winning games and winning games. And I don't think that anybody thought that this team was going to be the national champions. Then they got into the tournament, and then they played like nobody else had played.
In the NCAA tournament title game, the upstart Ramblers made up a huge deficit, then took defending champion Cincinnati into overtime. After tying the score with 5 seconds left to play, Loyola produced the winning basket as the buzzer sounded. With a stunning 60-58 upset, the Ramblers secured a championship in their first ever NCAA tournament appearance. To many, the Ramblers were a team that had come from nowhere to win it all. But local residents could claim with pride that this team had come from Chicago. The NHL Blackhawks provided Chicago with another championship team during the 60s. In 1961, the Hawks bested Detroit 4-2 and won their first Stanley Cup since 1938.
As far as having the guts and the drive and the desire, I don't think any team had more or as much as that particular 1961 team.
Remember, it's not how fast you do it. There's no winners and losers in this thing.
Today, Stan Mikita operates a hockey camp for hearing-impaired children.
Get your body in front of him. You don't have to hit him. Just stand in front of him.
But when his career began, Mikita was not exactly a positive role model for youngsters. Number 21 had a penchant for piling up penalties. Despite heaven-sent talent, Mikita was hell on skates.
In Montreal, the French Canadians called me Le Petit Diable, which translated means the little devil. My style of play was the gung-ho, go-get-'em type of thing in the corners. I didn't mind going in the corners. I went out and started beating on people before they started beating on me. Naturally, because of my size, I didn't win too many fights.
I used to tell him all the time, Stan, you have to change your attitude. And he'd say, if I were you, Bobby, I'd spear this guy, and I'd hack this guy, and I'd whack this one. And I said, Stanley, but I said, I don't have a long enough stick to score from the penalty box. I said, where you are most of the time.
You know, I was accumulating penalties at well over 100 minutes a season. And at that time, that was kind of unheard of, really, especially for a center iceman.
But in 1965, the Little Devil was redeemed by a little angel.
Our youngest child at the time, Meg, she was 3 years old, would stay up and watch maybe 1 or 2 periods of the game. And she made a comment to her mother. She said, Mommy, why is it that sometimes when the whistle blows, the other guys go to their own bench, they sit with their friends and their teammates, and sometimes when the whistle blows, Daddy has to sit by himself. Does he not like his teammates, or they don't like him? And, you know, I kind of thought to myself, if a 3-year-old child could see that something is wrong, then I should be able to figure out what was going on.
This fiery spirit became a model of fair play. A 2-time MVP, he was also awarded the Lady Byng Trophy for sportsmanship. And in 1983, Stan Mikita was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Walter Payton is known as sweetness off the field. But in a Bears uniform, number 34 is no cream puff. For 13 seasons, this fierce competitor has bruised, bounced off, and bowled over those trying to bring him down.
I enjoy the contact of the game. That's why I was brought up.
Once you have that ball, you know, you have the shoulder pads on, you have the helmet. Instead of taking it, try to dish it out.
When they hit you as hard as they can and then you pop back up, then they go, oh my God, I tried to kill this guy and I didn't hurt him. I just might as well, it's going to be like this all day. I just might as well just tackle him and get him down.
A late season contest in 1977 saw Payton wage a one-man assault against 11 Minnesota defenders. The Vikings were overmatched. On this day, Peyton carried the ball 40 times for an NFL single-game record 275 yards rushing. This was a great moment for Chicago and for Peyton, who would once again enable hometown fans to witness history 7 years later. In his 10th NFL season, Peyton surpassed Jim Brown as pro football's all-time leading rusher.
All right, here we go. McMahon asks for quiet. Second play of the second half from the 21-yard line. Walter needs 2 to break the record. Wide to the left is Galt. McKinnon lines up wing to the right. I formation. Quick pitch to Walter. Looking for the record. Cuts back. He's got it. He's out over the 25 to the 26-yard line. Walter Payton becomes the National Football League all-time leading rusher, surpassing Jim Brown on his second carry here in the second half. And that's the equivalent to Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. And listen to the standing ovation.
The motivating drive for me has been for the athletes that have tried, but yet and still have failed to reach that certain achievement. And also the athletes that didn't get an opportunity to, like the Overstreets and the Delaney's and the Brian Piccolos. You know, this simplifies what the game is made of. And what I did out there today is a reflection of those guys, because they made the sacrifices as well. And it's a tribute to me to bestow this honor upon them. Thank you.
Walter Payton's career is a testament to courage and class. He typifies the tradition of Chicago's great sports heroes, athletes who have consistently demonstrated that the city of big shoulders also has a big heart. To live in Chicago is to experience Mother Nature's foulest moods. In 1932, a snowstorm forced the first playoff game in NFL history off the Wrigley Field turf and under the roof of Chicago Stadium. The Bears won, playing on a field that was scarcely 80 yards long. In 1987, the wettest August in Chicago history sent golfers at the Western Open scurrying for scuba gear. But a cold December drizzle in 1965 wasn't enough to stop a Kansas Comet from making history.
The day of the game, very, very rainy, wet day, and I don't like to play in wet weather because anything can happen. You can slip and pull a muscle. There's so many things that you can't do on a wet day. But that particular day, everything went right for Gale Sayers. The 49ers were slipping, the rest of the Bears were slipping, but Gale just walked through everybody and scored 6 touchdowns. It worked out to be an outstanding day for me.
The things that he did that day, I don't know that will ever be duplicated. I remember one thing, that was the best catch I ever made in football that day, and nobody remembers it because he scored 6 touchdowns. That's the truth.
And at one point, I turned to a friend of mine on the sidelines, John Thomas. I knew I could trust him to talk like this to him. And I said to him, I said, John, this may sound bad. I said, I'm enjoying this. We're watching history. And he says, you know, I am too.
Chicago crushed San Francisco 61-20 in the greatest game of the Kansas Comet's career. A career that was punctuated in 1977 when Gale Sayers became the youngest man ever voted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The climate was decidedly sunnier on July 6, 1933. The World's Fair was underway, and Chicago celebrated by hosting baseball's very first All-Star Classic. Tribune sports editor Arch Ward created the original idea of a game between the best of the American and National Leagues. And in the inaugural, Babe Ruth stole the show with the first home run in All-Star history. The midsummer meeting was supposed to be a one-time only affair, but 50 years later, Comiskey Park once again played host, this time for the game's silver anniversary. On that night, native Chicagoan Fred Lynn made all-star history right in his own hometown. Lynn blasted the first Grand Slam homer in all-star annals while helping the American League snap an 11-game losing streak. Comiskey Park was a haven for heroes throughout that summer. The White Sox stormed to the Western Division title by winning ugly. Their brand of baseball wasn't pretty, but the results were beautiful. The Sox won the West by a record 20 games, clinching the title at Comiskey on September 17th.
Here's the pitch to Baines. Swinging a fly ball. This will be it. Center fielder's got it. Cruz is tagged. Here's the throw. Not in time. Stop Flynn. The White Sox have won the 1983 American League Western Division title on a sacrifice fly by Henry.
The Sox have been one of the town's most popular teams. But few fans know that the Harlem Globetrotters were a Windy City creation, founded in 1927 by Chicagoan Abe Saperstein.
My dad got together a group of Phillip High School students from Chicago who were the city champions. And my father then went on to rename this group of 5 athletes the Harlem, connotating black, not that they came out of Harlem. Globetrotters because he had aspirations of them going perhaps as far as Iowa and maybe as far east as Ohio and possibly up to Wisconsin.
The Trotters' fame has extended a bit further than the American Midwest. The Clown Princes of basketball are the world's most famous sports team, and Abe Saperstein started it all right in Chicago. The Windy City was also the training site and residence of Joe Louis, a fighter who let his thunderous fists do all the talking.
Joe was always in control of his feelings. He didn't express emotion. He was imperturbable. You could never tell much from Joe's expression how he was feeling. It was very difficult in fights. Joe was all business, no expression ever. He would throw 50, 60 punches with no expression on his face. Just a tremendous fighting machine.
In 1937 at Comiskey Park, Louis knocked out James Braddock and became the youngest man and only the second black ever to win the heavyweight title.
Despite any earlier feelings, racial feelings, most of the people there were Chicagoans, and they were glad to see a Chicagoan win the title. He represented achievement because there were not too many figures that young blacks could identify with. There was an unspoken agreement, as in baseball, that black just couldn't fight for the heavyweight championship, and that was broken.
Joe Louis shattered long-held traditions. But at Wrigley Field, the past is zealously preserved in a ballpark where time stands still. There is only day baseball at Wrigley. No light fixtures anywhere. The grass is real. The outfield walls are twined with ivy. The scoreboard is still operated by hand.
He swings, misses a changeup.
It is the only park where a fan can view the game from his very own rooftop, just as Northsiders watched the Cubs a half-century ago.
There's no changes, and I think the people who come there and are Cub fans don't like change, and that's not bad. They like stability in their lives.
The people have a stadium. We have a ballpark. And that, I suppose, sums it up pretty well. It's a ballpark. It's a place where you can go and enjoy yourself. You can go out to Wrigley Field on a nice sunny afternoon, and you'll see people out there as their parents and their grandparents did before them.
How long have I been coming? Well, I started way back in 1931. So that's a long time ago, before you were even here.
Wrigley rooters have seen great sluggers like Hack Wilson, whose single-season home run and RBI records have stood for more than 50 years. The homer in the Gloman, Gabby Hartnett's clutch blast of 1938 that sent Chicago to a pennant, the most famous home run in Cubs history. Wrigley Field was also witness to the '69 Cubs, a team that seemed pennant-bound until bad luck crossed its path. In mid-August, Chicago led its division by 9.5 games. Yet by September, they had been caught and passed by the Miracle Mets. The bitterness of 1969 lingered for 15 years. But in 1984, a new edition of Cubs, led by MVP Ryne Sandberg, were eager to wash away the bitter memories.
In that year, we weren't really a favorite. We were expected to finish 5th or 6th that year, and we just turned everything around and made everybody believers. Putting up with people saying the Cubs are going to collapse, the day games are going to kill the Cubs. We had listened to this for 5 or 6 months, and we just showed everybody that we were a good ball club and that we could win.
On September 24th at Pittsburgh's Three Rivers Stadium, pitcher Rick Sutcliffe needed to retire just one more batter to give the Cubs their first postseason berth in nearly 40 years.
Jody came over to him and he says, I want to catch the last strike to the last hitter. And I knew what he meant. I knew he wanted me to strike the last guy out. His name was Joe Orsulak. They only got 2 hits that night, and I think he had both of them. Cubs going to the playoff was going to be a big deal for a lot of people. And that kind of put a charge in me. You know, that was probably the 3 hardest pitches I've thrown in my career.
To the long-suffering who had loved yet lost with their Cubs, this win reaffirmed the hopes and dreams of a city that remains forever loyal to the heroes of Wrigley Field. In October of 1906, Windy City baseball fever reached epidemic proportions. The Cubs went head-to-head with their South Side rivals, the White Sox. The Sox, known as the hitless wonders, used pitching and defense to beat the Cubs in the first and still only All-Chicago World Series. The only World Championship won by the Chicago Cardinals football team was in 1947 against the Eagles.
30,000 fans in Chicago's Comiskey Park find the weather cold, but the touchdown plays red hot. An Eagle 4th down kick is scooped up by Charlie Trippi, and this trip by Trippi is something. The Cardinals win 28-21.
This was to be the Cards' only moment of glory. By the 1950s, they had become the baggy pants buffoons of pro football. The Cardinals ran plays that looked like they'd been drawn in the dirt. And the dirt they played on wasn't so great either.
We played at Comiskey Park in those days, which is the home of the White Sox, so they used to sod the infield. And we had scored a touchdown, so it was on the south end of the field, which was the sodded portion. And Billy Cross went in to hold for Joe Gary. Well, the ball was snapped. Joe goes through the motion, makes a kick, and ref throws his hand up in the air. The stands all yell, and what had happened is that Joe had actually kicked a piece of sod had gone over the goalpost. And Billy Cross, I'll never forget, I happened to be looking at Billy, and the look on his face, because there he is still holding the ball.
Comiskey's close proximity to the Chicago stockyards also proved hazardous.
If the wind was blowing in the right direction, towards the park, the smell of the stockyards and the fur flying over and that air would be just unbelievable. And we had guys that would be out there practicing, and all of a sudden they're over in the sidelines throwing up and heading for the locker room and everything else because of that horrible smell that was coming in and that fur from the stockyards.
It wasn't a bull, but a babe who made history in the 1932 World Series. In Game 3 at Wrigley Field, the Yankees' Babe Ruth, so the legend goes, actually predicted he would hit a home run.
Well, happened this one particular time when I went to bat, Charlie Ruth was pitching. And I looked down at center field and I floored it. I said, I'm going to hit the next pitch ball right past the flagpole. Well, The good Lord must have been with him.
Many historians still question whether the Bambino really called his shot at all. Fact or fiction, the Babe's brash boast has become part of baseball lore. While Ruth achieved fame for calling his shot, it was 3 shots that gained notoriety for the Blackhawks' Bill Mosienko in 1952. His 3 goals in 21 seconds are the fastest 3 scores in hockey history. In 1917, Cubs pitcher Jim Vaughn dueled Cincinnati's Fred Toney in baseball's only double no-hit game. The Cubs lost. But other Chicago no-hitters had happier endings. In 1960, Don Cardwell, just acquired in a trade, made his very first start for the Cubs. With 2 outs in the 9th, he needed only to retire the Cardinals' Joe Cunningham to achieve baseball immortality.
There's a drive on the line to left field. Come on, Moose! He did it! He did it! Oh, fabulous catch! It's a no-hitter! A no-hitter! And what a catch that Morin made! Oh, brother, what a catch he made!
No-hitters are rare, but a Rose Bowl berth for Northwestern has happened just once. And only then, thanks to a now defunct mandate.
There was a rule in the Big Ten that you could not go 2 years in a row. And so the year before, Michigan had won. And we started the season in California against UCLA. And playing along, we were going along fine until we met Michigan. And then Michigan beat us. And that's the only game that we lost in the Big Ten. But because there was no repeat rule, we were the ones that got the bid. Nobody was moving the ball, and all of a sudden, Frank Aschenbrenner went out on a 70-yard run, and up to that time, that was the longest run from scrimmage in the Rose Bowl game.
The Wildcats won in the last minute on a trick play. Center Sarkisian snapped the ball to halfback Ed Tunnicliffe, number 15, who ran away from a misdirected Cal defense.
It's a direct pass between the center's right leg to the right halfback. In all the time that I ever played football, that is the one time I believe I was more nervous than ever because I had to make that snap.
The Wildcats won 20-14 in what remains to this day the only bowl game in which Northwestern has ever played. But the most incredible Chicago sports moment occurred in 1927 at Soldier Field, site of the World Heavyweight title rematch between new champion Gene Tunney and dethroned slugger Jack Dempsey. Boxing's first $2 million battle was not without controversy. A pre-fight dispute regarding referee selection grabbed early headlines.
Dave Barry was not slated to referee the fight. One Davy Miller was. And for some reason or the other, the Tunney people felt that if they had Davy Miller in there, he would be favoring Jack Dempsey all through the fight. And so Dave Barry was named the referee.
Rumors persisted that local racketeers had tried to fix the fight. Rumors that were never substantiated. What 145,000 spectators did see that night was the most bizarre boxing match in history.
Dempsey was out to end it early, and he knew that he was in with a pretty good boxer in Gene Tunney, but he knew if he hurt him once, he could take him out. Jack Kearns, who was the manager of Dempsey, had said, now look, Jack, whatever you do, don't let him go too long. He'll outbox you, and he was getting outboxed, but not that bad. And so the theory was, get him early, and be as vicious as you have been in the past.
Dempsey comes on through with a terrific right. There's another right landing on the champion's jaw. A barrage of left to right, and Tunney is down! Tunney is down! Dempsey's out on the other side, and the referee has not yet begun to count.
Now, the neutral corner was new at the time, but he had to go to the farthest neutral corner. But following the theory of Jack Kearns, Dempsey stopped in the center of the ring, waiting for Tunney to come up so that he could hit him again and hit him real good and hard because he had the momentum. Well, by this time, the count could have been 25, and Tunney was still on the floor, and finally, he went into the corner, but by that time, that count had really arisen.
Dave Barry's forced long count had bought Tunney valuable time to recover. The champion survived the round and went on to decision Dempsey in 10. Dempsey first disputed, then finally dropped his objections, announcing his retirement soon after. Tunney himself fought only once more, the final postscript to the strangest moment in Chicago's sports history. Bill Veeck skillfully pitched the joys of baseball to Chicago. His salesmanship and showmanship were pure genius.
Veeck was certainly a genius at merchandising. He believed in the fun of the old ballpark theme, too. That's what it was all about.
Veeck was famous for the weird, wild promotional ploys that he devised during 2 separate stints as White Sox owner. This innovative iconoclast gave Comiskey Park the aura of a 3-ring thrill show.
He enjoyed the circus atmosphere if he could create it. But don't ever forget one thing about Veeck. He knew as well as anybody that there's no substitute for winning.
In 1959, Veeck had a winner, the Go-Go Sox. This was a team of scratch hitters and speed demons who torched opponents by burning up the base paths. The home run was a seldom thing for the Sox, but they ran home with a dizzying and dazzling efficiency. When the dust settled on the 1959 season, the White Sox had won their first American League pennant since 1919.
Winning a pennant really shook up the south side of Chicago. Fire Commissioner Quinn turned the air raid sirens on, and some people were put out by it. Most of the ones that were put out were not baseball fans, naturally. The ones that were fans, they were happy by it. Any jubilation that could happen, they were part of it.
Bill Veeck did not build the '59 Sox, but he nurtured them with a passion for baseball that made him one of the sport's most imaginative entrepreneurs.
I guess I have seen everything in this country. Yosemite, Old Faithful, the Grand Canyon, and the most beautiful thing is a ballpark filled with people.
The horizon is a basketball arena filled with people, thanks to Coach Ray Meyer, whose emotions and energies propelled DePaul into national prominence. For 42 seasons, Meyer earned a huge share of hurrahs and unleashed a hard volley of harangues.
Watch him, Mitch! You did the same thing again. When he called switch, you're coming back like this with the head down. There's Bird over there. You're being in a help position. The ball's here. You backpick. Don't stay there. You're killing us underneath.
The man known simply as Coach produced 724 victories and 20 postseason tournament bids during a tenure that began in 1942. 3 years later, the Blue Demons won the NIT championship. Their star was Big George Mikan, number 99.
When he first started at DePaul, he was not a well-coordinated athlete. We did a lot of things with George. I even hired girls to teach him how to dance that would give him some rhythm. I had the boxing coach teach him how to punch a bag. I made George do so many things. Afterwards, I used to feel sorry for him.
People pitied the Blue Demons when they faced favored UCLA in the NCAA Far West Regionals. At stake was Coach's first ever trip to the Final Four.
I didn't think we had that much of a chance against them, but when we started the ball game, it was a very fast running game. And I think of all the teams that played for me at DePaul, that team for 20 minutes was the best team I've ever seen on the floor. We passed the ball. It was just beautiful to watch. I think that game was probably the best one I've ever coached. In fact, I got the biggest kick out of that one because I had gone to those conventions for years and looked up and saw the 4 coaches up there, and I'd say, oh, well, maybe someday I'll be up there. And here I was, up with the up with the 4 winning coaches, and I enjoyed that.
George Halas was more than a coaching wizard. He was a visionary whose genius helped create the National Football League.
I'm George Halas. In 1920, I met with 10 other owners in an automobile showroom in Canton, Ohio, to form this organization, which is now known as the National Football League. We had great confidence in our game even then. We played in open fields and bleachers much like this training camp. It wasn't until 1925 when Red Grange, the fabulous Red Grange, joined the Chicago Bears, and we had our first grade crowd.
George, when I met him, was his own press agent for the Bears. He did his own coaching. He played right end. He signed the players. He did his own scouting. He ran the concessions. He was the guy that looked out for the police and everything at Wrigley Field. He was a one-man gang. I remember my first trip to Washington, D.C. Senator McKinley called George Halas and myself and invited us to go to the White House. The senator introduced us as George Halas and Red Grange with the Chicago Bears. And I remember President Calvin Coolidge's remark. He said, "Young men, I'm glad to know you." He said, "I always like animal acts."
But eventually, the Bears became well known in houses all across America for a bruising style of play, typified by runners like Bronco Nagurski. Devastating defense also was part of a mighty mystique fueled by Papa Bear, who fired up his team to fever pitch for the 1940 championship against Washington.
2 weeks previously, the Redskins beat them 7-3. Subsequently, George Marshall, the owner of the Washington Redskins at that time, plastered his newspapers with stories about the Bears being crybabies over losing that game.
And Halas, all he had to do was just remind them of some of those things that were said and printed and quoted. And after that, the ball players took over.
The game's very first play from scrimmage featured split-end George Wilson's famous 2 for the price of 1 block. After Bill Osmanski's 63-yard score, quarterback Sid Luckman helped shape the most lopsided rout in NFL history. In the third period, the Bears ran 3 interceptions into the end zone. On this day, Chicago reigned supreme by unleashing a thunderous torrent of touchdowns that never subsided. With a 73-0 victory, the Bears earned the legendary tag, Monsters of the Midway. But eventually, Halas stopped producing champions, and by 1963, it appeared that Father Time had gotten the best of Papa Bear.
George Halas was getting up in years, and remember, the Bears hadn't won a world championship since about the mid-40s.
The media was on Halas for remaining as coach again. The game has passed him by. He's too old now.
But the Bears captured the 1963 championship by beating the Giants 14-10. On this wicked winter afternoon, Halas added one more glorious chapter to a myth that will be forever frozen in time.
Now, all of a sudden, from a senile old man at the age of 69, suddenly he is now a veteran genius. I know that had to be one of the most satisfying moments George Halas ever had in his life.
George Halas was the Windy City's own Merlin, a wizard with a magic touch who earned himself a hallowed place in the Hall of Fame and in the pantheon of professional sports.
There would be no football league today had it not been for George Halas, there's no doubt about it.
Just being a part of the growth of the National Football League, that to me is the greatest thrill or event in my life.
Chicago has been home for great players and heaven for superstars. Michael Jordan of the Chicago Bulls is so overloaded with talent, you would think he'd short circuit.
There's not one game that I've covered Michael Jordan that he didn't bring me out of my seat. Every game he does something that is just almost brand new. Michael does not do like a lot of other fellows do in the NBA, going out and play against the best defensive player each night. Michael usually plays against the best 3 defensive players on another team. But one day that I don't think I will ever forget was April 20th, 1986. It was 5 days after I had to pay my income tax like everybody else, and we were in the Boston Garden. You have to remember, Michael had missed 64 games during the regular season, and he broke his foot. He was out 64 games. Michael came back and put together a performance in a double overtime. He got 63 points. I think he made every variety of shot that you could make.
Here came Mr. Jordan, and there went the single-game playoff scoring record. His 63 points became a great moment in both NBA and Chicago sports history. Another star who not only stood center stage, but was center stage, was Bobby Hull.
There's a new hero on the international sports scene, Bobby Hull. Bobby broke the old record that stood since 1945 by netting more than 50 tallies in a single season. Hull eases himself near the net to grab the opportunity set up by Stapleton. It's number 53 for Bobby Hull. You might say he's skating his way into the Hull of Fame.
I know when I sat on the bench and he would pick the puck up behind our net, now he starts going and trying to get into full stride. And when he hits the blue line, he's in full stride. It was just poetry in motion, the way he was moving. Something special was happening at that particular point. And when your own teammates happen to get up off the bench, I know I did, and then you look at the opposition bench and they're also standing, that's what made Bobby Hull exceptional.
Hull possessed matchless physical skills, but his character proved as strong and durable as his body.
He never let a kid go by without signing an autograph. I know we had to wait for him on the bus 15, 20 minutes while he signed that little kid's autograph, who'd been standing there waiting for him for maybe an hour in the cold.
My mother poked me in the ribs and said, Robert, she said, I think that little boy wants your autograph. And I said, Mom, why would he want my autograph? Well, and I looked over and the kid was goo-goo-eyed, and I said, would you like me to sign that? He said, yes, Mr. Hull, would you? And I said, of course I would. And after I had, my mother says, now, Robert, don't you ever forget, they're the most important people.
The difference between the Golden Jet and other players was the difference between the biplane and the F-16 fighter. His legs were fast, his slapshot faster. He was a record-setting scoring machine.
Bobby Hull from his own blue line. The Golden Jet driving at center and on the Ranger defense. Getting set, he may pass or shoot. He drives one, score! And the crowd goes wild. Bobby Hull has broken the all-time scoring record of 51 goals in a single season.
It wasn't so much the scoring of the goal, it was a tremendous ovation that the Chicago fans gave me, and it was just thunderous and fantastic. And of course, I've always said that Chicago was the greatest city in the world, and likely the greatest group of fans that any athlete would want to play for. And it was a love affair. We had a love affair with them, and I wanted to go out and entertain them, and they showed their appreciation every time that I tried to do something for them. It was just a wonderful place to play.
Chicago has been the setting for many other miracle makers and record breakers. Hall of Famer Ernie Nevers of the Cardinals set the NFL single-game scoring record in 1929. Jay Berwanger of the University of Chicago won the first Heisman Trophy in 1934. Notre Dame has produced the most Heisman winners, and in 1953, the trophy was awarded to Johnny Latner from Chicago's Fenwick High School. Sid Luckman of the Bears was the first quarterback to throw 7 touchdowns in a single game. But this was a city of running backs. Gale Sayers, Willie Gallimore, and Ollie Matson. Matson was a hot rod. He blazed by you at 100 miles an hour with a top down and the radio blasting. While dragsters love straightaways, sports cars prefer turns, and no one cornered or spun out of trouble like the Bears' Willie Gallimore. Like Gallimore, Gale Sayers climbed to the top of the stairs. But he took them 2 steps at a time. No runner ever combined elusiveness and speed like the Kansas Comet. Speed was also the trademark of Chicago's own Willie White, a Hall of Famer in track and the only woman to qualify for 5 Olympic teams. In 1964, the University of Loyola's Tom O'Hara set a world indoor record for the mile with a time of 3:56 at Chicago Stadium. While O'Hara was a man of the moment, the Chicago White Sox's Luke Epling was a man of many moments. He was called Old Aches and Pains, and the worse he felt, the better he hit. He was a great shortstop, a lifetime 300 hitter, and a Hall of Famer. A hard man, but a soft touch.
Luke got a request from a Red Cross organization in his hometown of Atlanta. They wanted some baseballs to be able to auction them off or sell them or something and raise some money. And Luke requested a couple of dozen baseballs. And the word came down while Luke was getting ready to take batting practice that Harry Grabner had turned him down on it. Said, no, you can't have it, we can't spare it. Luke sent the runner back to tell Harry, you better come out and watch batting practice. Grabner came down, and Luke fouled 12 straight pitches into the seats. And on the 12th one, Grabner yelled, you got the balls, Luke, you got them, it's okay.
But no player defined what is best in sport and sportsmanship than Mr. Cub, Ernie Banks. Few in baseball have come so far and changed so little. His spirit was infectious, his joy contagious.
Ernie Banks, the most inspirational guy I've seen and been with in all my entire life.
Ernie was the happiest guy in the world to be in the major leagues. He was just so tickled to be playing baseball for a living, and it showed. It really was a genuine love of the sport itself. Ernie had the ability to make a little boy or a little girl feel like the reason he came to the park that day was to see them.
The team effort of the game, the real beauty of the game. It was like art to me. And it was just a good feeling being in a place where I felt I was in charge and be creative.
Banks' whip-thin body generated amazing power. Home run power that resulted in one of the great moments in Chicago's sports history.
As I was driving to the ballpark, I was listening to Nat King Cole sing that song. Bring out those lazy, hazy, daisy days of summer. In my mind, I said, gosh, I gotta do something to make people happy today. Pat Jarvis was pitching the Atlanta Braves. Threw me a fastball inside.
That's a fly ball, deep to left, track, that's it, hey, he did it, Ernie Banks got number 500.
My thought that day was to do something to make people happy and make them feel proud that they followed the Cubs or that they came to the game on that particular day.
On January 27, 1986, the city of Chicago rejoiced. Over 500,000 faithful ignored frigid temperatures and lined LaSalle Street to honor their Chicago Bears. The sounds of success rang from the North Shore to the Gold Coast. The celebration was the culmination of a dream that began in training camp, where the Bears' rise to the summit began. But the rise did not come easily. There were many years spent at the foot of the mountain, looking up.
In a way, I think those years have really been a foundation because there was a lot of years of frustration and despair at times. It's made us very hungry. And in the long run, I think that those years of frustration weren't pointless. I think it paved a foundation for us to build our championship on.
Less than 2 years before his death, George Halas selected as head coach, a man molded in his own rough, tough-as-nails image. That man was Mike Ditka.
All I want them to do is understand that what we're telling them is possible, it's probable, and why not? Why not the Bears? I mean, everybody else has had their day in the sun.
From September through January, the Chicago Bears were a team on a mission. They let their fantasy take flight and rode the wings of destiny for one unforgettable season.
I told our football team early in the year a couple things. The one thing is put a chip on your shoulder, leave it on there for the whole year, and defy somebody to knock it off. If they do knock it off, make them pay the price.
The new Monsters of the Midway played a sophisticated and complex defense, but it still boiled down to hitting, something they did with obvious gusto.
It's something every defensive guy wants, is that big hit every week, and that's what you're out there, to have fun and lay some wood on some people.
It's like a pack of wild dogs. You know, if one of them's mean, they're all going to be mean.
Come Sunday, boy, their one job is just annihilate people. I mean, I'd hate to play against them.
The youngest team in the NFL treated their elders with disdain. Attacking with unrelenting pressure, the Bears' defense became the finest and most ferocious in the league. Quarterback Jim McMahon brought the same blue-collar approach to his white-collar position. And on a Monday night in September, he left his sickbed for the sidelines in Minnesota. There, he answered a call to glory.
We're down 17-9, and the crowd was really into the ball game. To me, it looks like things were slipping away. And I went up to Mike again. I said, look, you know, I'm ready to play. You got to make a decision.
Evidence from the sidelines looks like Jim McMahon will be coming into quarterback. Spent 2 nights at Lake Forest Hospital for back spasms up near his neck. And he's on to try to revive the Bears' offense.
It's just one of those things where I just felt I had it that night. And as it turned out, I did.
To the left side, Vikings coming on a blitz. McMahon back to throw. Throws it deep down the middle. Willie goes his end zone, makes the over-the-shoulder catch to the 30, to the 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown!
2 more touchdown passes earned the Bears a storybook win and added a powerful new punch to an old fight song. With a potent mix of offense, defense, and special teams play, the Bears worked overtime to earn 15 regular season wins.
McMahon takes the snap, hands it off to Payton. Big hole up the middle, to the 10, to the 5, to the end zone. Touchdown!
This team of character and characters captured the imagination of a city and a nation as they charted a course for a championship.
I think they're hard-working guys, and you know, they're down-to-earth guys, just like guys you meet down here.
Perry in motion to the near side.
William Perry's surprising and seismographic touchdowns punctuated the drive to the playoffs, where the Bears began by crushing the New York Giants 21-0.
Deep pop flies the right side of the end zone for McMahon. Touchdown! Great catch! Great catch!
The Bears were fast approaching the gun lap in the race to Super Bowl 20. Only one team stood in their way, the Los Angeles Rams.
Soldier Field in Chicago, the NFC Championship, and a trip to New Orleans for Super Bowl 20.
It's going to be very tough to throw the ball and very tough to kick the ball because of that swirling wind.
Why don't they put a dome over this place?
The sun. This is the greatest day.
Kick ass. Let everything hang out. Everybody ready? Everybody ready? Let's go. Let's go.
The Bears chilled the Rams to the bone with a record second straight playoff shutout.
It has gotten colder steadily, and now the weather that everybody talked about
I wonder if they're
finally arrived.
maybe they're cheering for the snow.
I think they are.
Not to get theatrical, but I mean, how better can you write a script here for crying out loud?
Third down, 11 yards to go for Dieter Brock and company. Brock back to pass, the rush on.
Most teams venture cautiously into pro football's biggest game. However, the Chicago Bears arrived in New Orleans with a confident swagger.
Guys just walked around and looked at each other and shook their head in reassurance that this is our day. I don't care who we're playing, it just didn't matter. We're not going to be denied.
With a chip still firmly on their shoulders, the Bears put on a classic performance by which all Super Bowl winners, past or present, will be measured. In the most one-sided Super Bowl ever, they set 7 records and concluded the greatest season in the history of this charter franchise. All the years of battered dreams and near misses were erased in this, the greatest moment in Chicago sports history.
We set out to accomplish a mission, and the mission was accomplished. And it was a good feeling to know that at the end of the game, we could look at each other and give each other a hug with the tears that were in our eyes and feel that we came here to win, and we did it. Immediately I thought about the people in Chicago for so many years, since '63, have not known what it was to have a winner, to have a champion. And we brought it to Chicago, and that was exciting.
The '85 Bears. They belong to Chicago, a city in whose image they were created and in whose heart they live. Unforgettable images of champions and triumphs define Chicago's sports tradition. The city boasts a gallery of gallant competitors, superb athletes who wore Chicago's colors with honor. Pioneers and personalities have provided a lasting legacy of golden memories and great moments. The spirit that makes Chicago unique is etched on the faces of legends. It lives forever in the hearts of heroes.